Exploitation of Artisans and Weavers. The Indian handicrafts faced a sharp decline with the advent of British from the 19th century. East India Company began to monopolize the artisans and started dictating its own terms on the craftsmen. The commercial policies of the British government were largely influenced by imperialistic regime in India. During the later half of 18th century and the first half of 19th century, Britain underwent profound socio-economic transformation due to Industrial Revolution, and the British industry developed and expanded rapidly on the basis of modern machines, factory system and capitalism. By means of imperialism, British also captured and monopolized markets in Asia and Africa. It now had a strong industrial class, in whose interest manufactured goods were exported to vast markets, provided in the form of colonies. Thus, the British government followed a policy of free trade or unrestricted entry of British goods in India in the 19th century. The Indian handicrafts were exposed to an unequal competition of machine-made goods from the British. The Indian handmade goods were unable to compete with the much cheaper machine-made foreign products. The Indian products which competed with British products were subjected to heavy duties when exported. The duties on some of these exports was as high as 400%. This led to the decline of Indian export market. The desire for raw materials to keep the British Industrial Revolution going led to these drastic measures. The British commercial policy was guided by the needs of the British industry, with the main aim of selling British goods and a regular supply of raw materials. Some of the factors that led to the downfall of Indian industries are as follows. Imposition of heavy duties on Indian imports. The British policy of free trade in India. Exporting raw materials from India in large quantities. Oppression of weavers as they were paid less amount than the usual price. The unfair competition with British machine-made goods. Callous attitude of the British administration towards Indian weavers.
Drain of wealth. The constant flow of wealth from India to England, for which India did not get an adequate economic, commercial or material return, has been described by Indian national leaders and economists as drain of wealth from India. The colonial government was utilizing Indian resources, revenues, agriculture and industry not for developing India but for its utilization in Britain. If these resources had been utilized within India, then they could have been invested and the income of the people would have increased. The drain of wealth was interpreted as an indirect tribute extracted by Imperial Britain from India year after year. Background. In the mercantilist concept, an economic drain takes place if gold or silver flow out of the country as a consequence of an adverse balance of trade. In the 50 years before the Battle of Plassey, the East India Company had imported bullion worth £20 million into India to balance the exports over imports from India. British government adopted a series of measures to restrict or prohibit the imports of Indian textiles into England. Apart from other measures, in 1720, the British government forbade the wear or use of Indian silks and calicoes in England on pain of a penalty on the weaver and the seller. Early drain of wealth. After Plassey, the situation was reversed and the drain of wealth took an outward as England gradually acquired monopolistic control over the Indian economy. So, the drain of wealth from India to England started after 1757, Battle of Plassey, when the company acquired political power and the servants of the company, a privilege stated and therefore acquired wealth through dastak, dastur, nazarana and private trade. After the East India Company extended its territorial aggression in India and began to administer territories and acquired control over the surplus revenues of India, the company had a recurring surplus which accrued from 1. Profits from oppressive land revenue policy, 2. Profits from its trade resulting from monopolistic control over Indian markets, 3. extractions made by the company's officials. This entire surplus was used by company as an investment, that is, for making purchases of exportable items in India and elsewhere. Against the exports of goods made out of this investment, India did not get anything in return. This is how there began the drain of wealth, which was nothing but a unilateral transfer of fund. The early nationalist leaders made this point central to their economic criticism of the British colonialism.